Chapter 4, Police Strategies, Part 3. In this PowerPoint presentation, we're going to focus completely on community-oriented policing, or COP. Now, I will likely refer to it as community policing throughout this lecture. It's a lot easier to say than continuously saying community-oriented policing. They're the same thing. Community policing, community-oriented policing, same thing. As we've said a number of times, community policing emerged in the 1970s. We had this realization that the police had become too detached from the public, that if we really wanted to get a handle on crime and serious social problems, then the police needed to be in touch with the community. They needed to form some kind of relationship with the community. They needed to have the community assist them in fighting these crimes. The police could only do so much on their own. And especially if they were seen as an invading army, an occupying army, an outsider, then they probably weren't going to get very far. And if you watch the Philadelphia canvas video that I had in the first, with the first chapter's materials, you saw that there was a very much an us versus them mentality. You don't snitch, you don't talk to the police, and the police, had often a negative view of the public as well, or at least some members of the public. So they weren't really talking to each other, they were talking past each other, if they were talking at all. So community policing hoped to change that. And so what were the main elements of community policing, or what are the main elements? Well, obviously, it wouldn't be called community policing if there wasn't some emphasis on a partnership with the community. And so the first major element of community-oriented policing is that the police will be closely partnered with the community. They will see each other as both involved in and essential parts in dealing with crime and other social problems. Community policing was meant to be proactive. So the focus was on crime prevention. Again, if you think back to those 9 principles of policing, we're seeing these principles come out in community-oriented policing. Accountability to the public, service to the public, focus on prevention, not just reaction. So community policing is meant to be proactive. We are trying to prevent crime, not just respond to it, not just react to it. And then finally, community policing encourages police to use discretion. It may not be the best thing to fully enforce the law in every single situation. And so until the 1970s, discretion was kind of the elephant in the room. Everybody knew that the police had a lot of power to decide how they would handle a case. Do I arrest? Do I warn? Do I just ignore the problem altogether? I pretend it didn't even happen. And so everybody knew it went on, but they pretended that it didn't. Well, in the 1970s, as community policing was emerging as a concept, the proponents of community policing said, don't deny discretion. View it as a valuable resource, as a tool. You have a lot of leeway to decide how to handle a situation. And so focus on the bigger goals. What is your ultimate goal in this situation? What is the best thing for society? What's the best thing for this victim, for whatever? Use your discretion to achieve that result. And so community policing, instead of denying discretion, really put it front and center and said, we want to teach police officers how to better use their discretion, so let's give them good training, let's hire smart people to make good decisions, we'll partner with the community, and we'll try to prevent crime. All sounds good, right? So has community policing been implemented? Well, not really, not fully. In pieces here and there, some departments do community policing more than others, but I would say that there really isn't any major police department in the United States that is 100% committed to community policing. There is still a lot of reactive, traditional, professional era policing going on. Well, why haven't they fully implemented? Well, one of the problems is just this idea of community. At first blush, it sounds pretty simple. Okay, you're going to form a relationship with the community. Well, what is the community? In any single neighborhood, there are probably several, quote, communities. I mean, there isn't just the community. Think of the Penn State campus. There are different communities just on the Penn State campus. There are students who live in dorms, so the campus is not just where they go to school, but it's their home. So they have certain interests, they have certain goals, they have certain expectations of the police. Then you have students who are commuters, who only come to the campus to take classes and maybe participate in some other activities, but they're not living there. That's not their home. So they have different expectations. You have professors and other employees who see campus as their workplace. And so their concerns are different than the residential students and different than the commuting students. And we have visitors that are passing through and all kinds of other. So when we say that the police should meet with the community, there may be hundreds of communities in a single city neighborhood. And so how do you identify which ones you're going to work with? Do you try to work with them all? And you can't possibly work with everybody in all of those communities. So who will you talk to? Who will be the representatives? Do those people really represent the community, so to speak? So if I go into a neighborhood and I only speak to the ministers and the religious leaders and the civic leaders, is that putting me in touch with the people who are involved with the gangs, who are in the gangs, who might eventually become gang members? So do those people really represent the community? Or do they represent a minority of the community? And so, you can start to get an idea pretty quickly how complex this is. And furthermore, you have a lot of communities, a lot of neighborhoods where people are moving in and out all the time. Think again of the Penn State campus. We hope that you're going to get out of here in 4 or 5 years. And so every year on campus, the people living in the dorm change. Some stay for another year, some move out, some graduate. And so if you're the police, how do you form a lasting relationship if the community is constantly changing? Also, even during the course of a day, the neighborhoods are different. When I did ride-alongs with the police in Richmond, Virginia, I did a lot of night shifts. Those neighborhoods look a whole lot different in the night than they do during the day. And so who's out in the streets at night? Who's out during the day? So this whole concept of community is very difficult. In fact, you may have some neighborhoods where there is no community at all. As I said in the last presentation, we may have individuals living behind locked doors. And so they don't know their neighbors. They don't care to know their neighbors. And so how do you create community policing when there isn't even a community there? That's where you may have to foster that sense of community. You may have to build the community on your own as the police. And that takes a lot of work. Preventing crime, our second major component of community policing. How do we prevent crime? Do we have enough resources to do it? Do we have enough know-how? If we take the terrible tragedies of school shootings that have been occurring, how do we prevent them? Is it arming teachers? Is it putting strict bans on guns? Is it mental health, providing better mental health care? Is it building stronger families? Is it video games? Who knows? We're struggling to figure out what will actually work to prevent more school shootings. So, if we have people with PhDs trying to figure out this problem and they can't figure it out, think how difficult it is for the police to figure it out as well when they're not trained to do the kind of research. And that's not belittling the knowledge of police officers, because they're very important. They may know more about the topic than the PhDs, but do they have the resources available to actually prevent the crime? Do they have the know-how? Even if they could find the root cause and they say, okay, the root cause of serious crime in this neighborhood is the lack of jobs. How is a police department going to bring in a factory? How are they going to bring in more jobs? So again, we have to be reasonable with what our expectations are. Yeah, let's try to do some really important things to change society, to change the community, but we may be limited in our ability to prevent crime. Discretion, our third factor. Not everybody makes good decisions. That probably pretty much goes without saying. You probably made some stupid decisions in your life. I know I have. And so how do we teach police officers to make better decisions? That's really at the heart of discretion. In the old days with domestic violence, the police officers would just want the parties to stop fighting for the night. And many police officers felt they should never get involved in domestic situations. Hey, that's a husband and wife thing. Why should I be here? And so their use of discretion was to basically just sweep it under the rug, and that's it, and do nothing about it. And so that wasn't a very wise use of discretion. So now we've hopefully trained police officers to better understand domestic violence and its complexities and to respond better and with better decisions. But again, that takes a lot of work to train people to make good decisions, to use their brains wisely to achieve the outcomes that are best in the situation. The police bureaucracy may cause difficulties in implementing COP. I mean, it's very structured. If we structure everything on the patrol system, how do we deal with police officers who want to be out there working with kids in the community when they're expected to patrol and answer calls? So the structure of the police, whether it's the command structure or just the way they do their business, may not be geared towards really fully implementing community policing. They're so tied to the radio calls that they don't really have time to do community policing. Resources, again, how much can they do to prevent crime? How much can they do to form a community, to train their officers to use discretion? All of these things. The rewards. Are police officers actually being encouraged to engage in community policing? Do we reward officers who do good community policing? And how do we measure that? How do we know when they're doing a good community policing project? It's a whole lot easier to reward police officers for writing traffic tickets. And so that often is what gets rewarded, even though that's not community policing. So we need to change our reward structure to encourage community policing. We need to train officers from the very beginning in the academy in community policing. Let's really get them from day one to think about community policing and to really do it actively. And finally, that helps to get the right applicants, because we need people who actually like to be out there with the public, who like to be working with the public. Not everybody does. Current status of COP, I think it's underutilized. I think most departments are still engaging in the old style professional era of policing, where the patrol officers are out there on patrol waiting for the next radio call to come in, and they're not very proactive. I think that the police often don't form true police community partnerships. It's often one-sided. The police just pretty much tell the community what they're going to do, or if the police meet with the community, it's just to have a gripe session, so to speak, with the community, let them air their beefs, and then we'll ignore them. You saw it in the Philadelphia video. They may not be talking to each other. They don't trust each other, so we might have to build trust, respect, all of those kinds of things before we can form partnerships. The research is really unclear whether COP actually reduces crime. It seems to be much better at reducing fear of crime than reducing actual crime. So it may have its own benefits. It's good to reduce fear of crime. That's not saying that's a bad thing, but it may help the community to form a truer picture of crime. But whether it actually reduces crime or not, that's still a little bit up in the air. It doesn't seem that most COP programs directly reduce actual crime, but then again, as we've said, COP is really underutilized by police departments, so if it was really fully implemented, maybe it would do a better job. Most of the time, the communities may not even be aware that COP is being implemented, so the police really need to advertise that they're doing community policing. Make sure the public is aware of what they're trying to do. Some studies have shown that where the public is aware of community policing, that they're more likely to call someone for assistance. It may not be the police. So it may be a third agency. So let's say a domestic violence victim doesn't call the police, but now because of police efforts to educate the public, she knows more about victims' resource centers. So the victim reaches out to the victim resource center, maybe not the police. So that's a good thing. Even if they're not calling the police, they're calling somebody for help. And finally, college-educated officers tend to like police departments that implement at least some community policing than those that do more traditional, because it really forces the officers to get out there, meet with the community, and use their brains more than just simply enforcing the law.